The following is a conversation with Dr. James Ketchum, a renowned shark researcher and marine conservationist. He's a co-founder and the director of marine conservation at Pelagios, Kakunjá, a non-profit protecting marine life here in Mexico. With decades of experience studying and protecting hammerhead sharks, whale sharks, rays, and other precious marine species, Dr. Ketchum shares valuable stories and learnings from the field of marine conservation. James, what is your favorite shark?
My favorite shark, it's a tough question because I have a number of favorites, but my favorite, I would say hammerhead.
Why?
The different species of hammerheads.
What makes the hammerhead shark?
Why hammerheads? Because they are one of the first sharks I ever saw since when I saw sharks for the first time, and then the shape of the shark. It's the head, the nature of the animal. It's so interesting. When I saw my first hammerhead, it was here in La Paz a number of years ago, and I saw it coming at me from a distance, and I saw a single hammerhead, but seeing that shape kind of moving through the water with a big head and this very streamlined body moving quickly, but also very majestic. It was for me I will never forget it. So it was like those moments when you see something as majestic as that, you'll never forget. And the second thing, or third or fourth, I forgot the number of things I like, is the schooling behavior. The schooling behavior is just incredible. Same thing, the first time I saw a school of hammerheads, it was here also in El Bajo, Espiritu Santo, near La Paz. In the same place where I saw that single hammerhead for the first time. I don't remember if it was that first dive or a second dive. Basically, I turned around to go to a different direction, kind of away from the seamount into the deeper areas, and that's where I saw the whole group of hammerheads. And seeing those animals, they look primitive in a way. They look like, not primitive because they're not simple, but primitive like something that it's back, like traveling back in time. That's what I try to say. Because right now, most of these animals are overfished, and to see those things, it's a luxury, And well, back then, I'm talking 25 years ago, we didn't know they were just going to basically disappear, but still was incredible for me to see that. Just also unforgettable experiences. And that's the reason hammerheads are one of my favorite sharks ever.
Wow, this is so cool. When I was coming here, I thought actually La Paz would be the place full of like sharks, so it would be like aquarium, so you just like only look underwater and there would be like hundreds of hammerhead sharks, but apparently it's not that many of them left at all.
It was like that. La Paz was like that, as you just describing, about 30, even more, 40 years ago, even before my time. 40, 50 years ago, it was exactly that. There were sharks everywhere. Even here in front of the harbor of the Malecon, there were sharks caught, tiger sharks, black tips, many different sharks were caught right in front of there. And the fishermen didn't have to go far away. They were just right there. And as decades went by, a lot of these species became less and less because of the overfishing. Overfishing has decimated most of the populations of sharks throughout the Sea of Cortez, especially here near La Paz, where you have a city that's been growing in the last decades, and the demand of fish and sharks, it's always higher than anywhere else here in the Baja southern part of the peninsula.
James, what mission are you on, and why does this mission matter to you and everyone listening right now?
One of my missions, because I have several missions, is exactly that, to recover the hammerheads for the Gulf of California. That's my mission right now. That's what wakes me up in the middle of the night. That's what keeps me going through the day, trying to recover these animals. And by recovering is to have good numbers of hammerheads, to have the schooling hammerheads again in these places where they used to be abundant, where I saw in many different places these animals very in good abundance, really nice schools, and just like in a very healthy situation. So that is one of my main missions, and from there you have other secondary missions that are associated to that, because in order to recover the hammerheads, we need to protect them. So we need to submit hammerheads for protection in Mexico. In Mexico, they're commercial species. They're totally unprotected because they're not considered wildlife. They're considered commercial species. That means they're a resource, and they're used for the flesh is used for ceviche, for food, and the fins are used for the Asian market. They're exported for the shark fin soup market. So overall, that species has been depleted because of that, and so that's one of the main things to try to propose to the Mexican government as a protected species. The other thing is to protect their spaces, their habitats. So in order to do that, we need to create more MPAs in the Gulf of California, because there are not enough. Most of the MPAs are pretty coastal, or they're just around very specific islands, and they don't really protect the habitat of these species, especially hammerheads and many other pelagic species that thrive around seamounts. So that's the other reason that we need to do that in order to recover hammerheads. And the other thing is to continue the research that we do to have more information, more data to support the conservation of this species. So we do science-based conservation here in Pelagios. And I was forgetting to include the fishermen. We try to do workshops as much as possible with fishermen to try to sensibilize the fishermen about the needs and the importance of protect the species. Luckily, the younger generations of fishermen around La Paz, around these areas in the southern Gulf of California, they're more informed because of social media, the cell phone. They understand better the word conservation. They're not afraid of the word. Before, I remember going to these fishing camps in many places, and whenever you said conservation, for them it was a bad thing. So that means they're going to be blocked for fishing. They're going to be prohibitions will come in to limit their fishing activities. So right now they understand conservation. Not only that, they want it. They want some conservation and better management efforts to conserve the species that they see. They see that all the species are going down.
This is so interesting because before, as a kind of stranger to this world of marine conservation, I was thinking that on one side we have conservation organizations who wants to protect fish, and on other side there are fishermen who want to kind of catch fish. But it seems they're way closer to each other, and it's great that you kind of working together to inform fishermen and vice versa, feedback loop both ways, kind of, right?
Exactly. We've always worked with fishermen since the beginning, and since we started Pelagios, and even before that, I've been working with fishermen most of my career, because they're the experts. They're sea people, they know about the ocean a lot. So throughout my career, most of what I know I've learned through the fishermen, and how to do knots, how to do things, how to fish. And not only that, also the ecology and the places and the different information that they only know by experience. They don't go to schools, they don't have any schooling or nothing like that, but everything they know is by experience. So they're your expert master hands to handle animals, to fish for animals, to locate the animals, to do all this work that we've been doing for the last 13 years here in Baja California. And we also, because of that, talking about the two-way thing, we get their expertise from that, but we also want to help them. So we have been helping the fishermen by providing them a job temporary job for them to fish for us to catch the sharks. And also we're helping now the fishermen since a few years ago to transition. Some of them will not do it, but some of them are prone to do it, to transition into other activities such as ecotourism. So some of them are ready for that. So we have been helping them to get a boat for that, because they don't have their boats or pangas, they're for fishing. You cannot use those boats for tourism. So luckily we found a boat, and we are gonna provide them with a boat so they can use that boat for tourism. We'll have all the permits so they're able to do those activities. Because otherwise they have no other opportunities. And outsiders, people coming from other parts of Mexico or foreigners, they bring money and they buy the boats and get the permits, and they're the ones getting all the profit from the tourism around these areas, and not the local people and not the fishermen.
What do I need to know about early James? What was main influences in your life, and how this shaped you?
Yeah, I was asked the same question recently, so I have the answer, I think, succinctly. My father was a sports fisherman, and so he loved the water. I mean, we would fish in rivers, in lakes, in the ocean. So since I was 5 years old, or maybe even less, my father took me to fishing expeditions in different places. I remember being a very, very small kid, about maybe 4 years old, and being with my father in these expeditions and watching him fish, and then he taught me how to fish. So I've always been next to the water, and so that was that's how I grew up. Although I grew up in Mexico City, in a big city, but all my vacations and holidays were in the ocean or rivers or lakes. Most of the time fishing. So that put me since an early age. I was very close to the ocean, and since very young, I've been very attracted to the water. I'm a water person, so I always love to be in the water. I see even a pool, I want to jump in if it's clear and nice, because I love the water. So I'm a water-oriented person since I was a very little kid. I learned how to swim since I was 5 years old, and then I learned to snorkel since a very young age, and then I learned to dive, also to scuba dive, really young as well. And then I came to La Paz. When I was young, was only 18 years old, I came to study marine biology. So all of this was kind of like a natural transition for me, and a natural decision to study marine biology. However, growing up in Mexico City, there's no ocean around it, so why marine biology? So I wanted actually to study, because that was what was available in Mexico City, biology, general biology. And but I was lucky enough to, and this is before the internet, there was no internet. This is crazy to say it, but there was no internet back then. And I saw a pamphlet of the university here in La Paz. I was looking into different schools because a friend of mine told me he was going to go to Ensenada to study oceanography, and I was interested in that, but I couldn't get any more information because there was no internet. So I went to this place in Mexico City, to the university, to the National University. They had this little office that had information from other universities in different parts of the country. So I ran across with the curricula of the oceanography degree in Ensenada, and I was looking at that, and under that was like 3 pages, they're bad photocopies of the university here, and it said marine biology. So I started reading, I want to study this. I want to study all the subjects, marine zoology, marine botany, so I was really drawn into that by this little piece of paper that was stapled to 2 pages, and they had a phone number, so I called, and they were accepting students, so I came over, and that's it. I'm here.
Thanks God. Yeah.
Well, it was good for me. Yeah.
And what were you doing before Pelagios, Kakunjá? In general, like you studied in the US later at the university?
Right before starting Pelagios, I was finishing up my PhD, and I studied ecology in UC Davis in California. And so I was there for a number of years doing my PhD. And when I was studying my PhD, I had the fortune to go down to a couple of the jewels of the Eastern Tropical Pacific. My advisor, he's a very well-known, famous shark specialist. His name is Peter Klimley, better known as Dr. Hammerhead. He loves that nickname. He loves it. So still he wants to be called Dr. Hammerhead. He even looks like a hammerhead. It's crazy. So I was lucky to study with him. He was my major professor. And when I was studying my PhD, I wanted to, because during my master's, I studied the whale sharks. I carried out the first study ever of whale sharks here in the Bay of La Paz. Nobody had studied the whale sharks here. So I did the first ever study in the 90s. And then after I finished my master's, I heard about Peter Klimley, and even I read all his articles, because I was, back then I was a dive master, and I worked for a number of boats, especially for a liveaboard. The name was Don Jose. Don Jose Avaroa was a very famous person and also a very famous boat that was based here in La Paz, that was used from the 80s all the way to 2010. So that boat was operated in these waters for 30 years. So I had a lot of history. So I was lucky to work with this kind of legendary boat. And in that boat, I went diving to all these places that still had sharks. I was also the naturalist on the boat. So I learned a lot of things. That was kind of my after college experience. So I did like a second degree working for this company, because I learned a lot. So back then, because this company was very focused on natural history and conservation, so they needed marine biologists to provide talks to the students and also to general tourists that they were interested in the natural history of the Sea of Cortez. So freshly out of college, out of marine biology, I started working for this company, for this boat, the Don Jose Avaroa. And it was incredible, because I was able to provide what I learned in college, and also what I was learning while I was working for the company, seeing all these animals. So I had to read a lot of stuff. So I read a lot of papers from Peter Klimley, and I read a lot of stuff about El Bajo Espiritu Santo, about the hammerheads. So I was hooked on the hammerheads, but I was also hooked on the whale sharks. So my first love in sharks were the whale sharks, and I still love the whale sharks. So whale sharks are my second favorite shark. And so after my study on the whale sharks, I wanted to do a PhD, and that's when I met Peter Klimley. He came over to La Paz. A hurricane had hit La Paz exactly the day I met him, and he said, "Well, I'm going to talk to you. I just met him briefly for 5 minutes. Oh, yes, let's talk later." But then the hurricane hit, because he was going to get in an expedition, and I was not going to see him again. But luckily, this hurricane helped me, because the hurricane held Peter Klimley in La Paz, and he sent me an email. There was no cell phones, or there were a little bit of cell phones. He sent me an email saying, "I'm here in La Paz, I'm stuck. You want to come and talk to me?" So I went over, I showed him everything I did for the whale sharks, and I said, "Okay, sounds good. I think I can support you to do your PhD at UC Davis." So that's how I transitioned from here to go to UC Davis to get my PhD in ecology, and then I specialized on hammerheads.
Wow. This is
Sorry,
no, it's great. Yeah. I love how that something good came out of the like a hurricane, and
Yes,
we had a
always.
bet. We had a bet with Elka about what's your favorite shark. So she bet it's hammerhead, and I bet it's a whale shark. And it seems you like both of them, but hammerhead is the favorite.
It is the first, so she was right.
Yeah, totally. Well, she knows you better. So. Did you start Pelagios right after the PhD, or there was some gap?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of gap. I did my work my PhD work in the Galapagos Islands, and before I mention all the story, how I met Peter Klimley, which was really amazing for me because he opened up for me the doors to all these other people, researchers, and incredible locations in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So I went. We did the first ever study in Malpelo Island off of Colombia, and because he was invited to do the first study on the sharks, especially in the hammerheads in Malpelo, which had never been studied before. So I was his student, I was his grad student, so I tagged along. So we went over there to Malpelo to do the first tagging expedition and to study hammerheads in Malpelo. So there in Malpelo, we met Alex Hearn, who was on that expedition, and he invited us to do the first ever shark study in the Galapagos Islands because they had never been studying. So I'm talking, this is not such a long time ago. Yeah. This is 2006. So in 2006, nobody had ever studied the sharks in neither of these islands. So we did the first study in Malpelo, and after that, we did the first study on sharks in the Galapagos Islands. And that first ever study that we started off in Galapagos became part of my PhD. But before I wanted to do a study on the whale sharks because during my master's I did a study here on the whale sharks in the Bay of La Paz. So I wanted to do that, but I never got the funding. So sometimes when some doors close, basically one door after another because I tried a large number of grants, proposals for different grants to get funding for my PhD project on the whale sharks because I wanted to continue with that. I just couldn't do it. So I had like 10 grants rejected. So all these doors closing, I was really depressed. I just didn't know what to do. And then I had the opportunity to go to Galapagos. And in Galapagos, basically I became one of the lead scientists, and basically that became my dissertation thesis. And also was thanks to Alex Hearn, a very good friend of mine and colleague, that he accepted me as a student, not for him, but as a student carrying all the work to do all the analysis needed to study the hammerheads and the sharks in the Galapagos Islands. So that work in the Galapagos Islands became my dissertation work afterwards.
And what does it take to study a shark? What kind of questions were you trying to find answer for?
Yeah, what were the questions that we wanted to know? Well, since the first study or first expedition to Malpelo, the main questions that we were trying to get were how these animals use these particular islands, how long they stay there, and where do they migrate and when. So there were a number of questions, but all of them related to movements and migratory patterns of these animals, especially hammerheads, that are still quite abundant at these islands. And also the idea, and that kind of came along the line a little later, that became part of my dissertation, was to use that information for designing marine reserves. So my first chapter of my dissertation is to study the residency and local movements of hammerheads in the Galapagos Islands. And the second chapter was a study on the fine scale movements, how these animals use very specific areas and how they move also vertically, how they use different habitats depending on depth, and also how they move away from the islands or not, depending on the time of the day. Because the original studies carried out by Peter Klimley, or Dr. Hammerhead here in El Bajo Espiritu Santo, he showed that the hammerheads, while they school during the day at the seamount, they moved right at sundown or dusk. They move out away from the seamount into an offshore foraging area. So he found that it is a pattern that they do every single day. So the sharks remain schooling during the day around the seamount, and then when the sun goes down, they move away into their foraging rounds several kilometers or miles away from the seamount, and then they return in the early morning hours of the day well, actually before sunrise, they return to the seamount to do the same thing over and over again. So what they do at the seamounts or islands is just schooling, moving around. It's called refuging, and refuging means remaining at a particular site for both either protection and also for resting. So they're not really doing much. They're just kind of swimming around. They're neither feeding or mating. They're just, the school remains mobile and moving around in circles around a particular island or seamount. And when the sun goes down, they move off and they return. What's also interesting that he found here in El Bajo Seamount is that they do a beeline. It's not like they wander off into many directions. They do a beeline all the way to their foraging areas, and they return in the same path to their refuging area, which are the islands and the seamounts. So that's why a few years later, while we were in the Galapagos, we participated in a film that they filmed our project that was called Shark Superhighway, because they used this paths as highways to move back and forth from their resting grounds to their foraging grounds. So one of the main questions when we went to Malpelo and Galapagos, do they follow the same pattern as they do here in the Gulf of California? That was one of the main questions. And the other one was how long they stay here, and if they leave, when do they leave, and why do they leave? So there were a number of questions, but all of them had to do with movements and migratory patterns of the hammerheads and other species of sharks.
How do they find this path, like usually?
Yeah, that's a good question. So also Peter Klimley, he found that back then, and this is late 70s, early 80s, he found that they follow this volcanic lava ridges. So from the seamount, it's not like the seamount and there's like nothing around it. It's the seamount, and typically there's like ridges, it's like spokes on a bike. So this ridges made of lava, they're like lava flows that continue for several kilometers, or even hundreds of miles, even away from the seamount. And these ridges of lava connect one seamount to another. So animals, especially hammerheads, they're very sensitive to the magnetic fields of these ridges. The volcanic rock produces a magnetic field, because the volcanic rock have a mineral, it's called magnetite. So this magnetite produces a magnetic field, but it's very small. But the hammerheads have such a sensitive, they're called Ampullae of Lorenzini. So underneath the head, we don't have a shark here. I can show you, like here. You cannot see it, but so right here under the snout, they have many tiny pores, and those pores are called Ampullae of Lorenzini. So inside of each ampulla is like a little pore. They have a sensor. They have a nervous terminal that has some oily content that is highly sensitive to electric fields and also magnetic fields. So all of the sharks can sense both electric and magnetic fields. But hammerheads, like this one, has a straight snout, but hammerheads have a wide head because it's shaped like a hammer. And it's called a cephalofoil. And the cephalofoil has a lot more surface area, so it contains 3 times or 4 times as many Ampullae of Lorenzini under the head of the hammerhead. So it works like a big antenna. So when you see a hammerhead swimming, the head is not static. The head goes like this, back and forth, because they're scanning the electric fields for looking for prey, but they're also scanning the bottom because they feel the electromagnetic fields coming out of the rock. So they use that for navigation. It's amazing. So they use the magnetic fields created by, it's called geomagnetic fields created by the rock, by the lava flows, and they use that to navigate from point A to point B from their schooling grounds to their foraging grounds, kilometers far away from the islands. We in the Galapagos, we followed the shark like one every second, because it's called active tracking, and we followed the shark constantly for 72 hours. It was 3-4 days, I forgot. And this animal moved 60 kilometers, between 60 and 70 kilometers away from the island. So they can move far away and then they return. How they return, they use the magnetic fields. So that's why we call it the shark superhighway, because they use this fields as a highway. Pretty much as when you're driving a car, you steer, you use your steering wheel to keep on track. Sharks do the same thing, especially hammerheads.
Wow, this is so fascinating. Can they see with the eyes, or they mainly use magnetic fields and like hear maybe?
Vision underwater is always limited. So that's one of the senses that it's not the best one, especially for marine animals. It's not very well developed, except in some animals like squid and octopi. They use their vision a lot because they don't move a lot. They stay like within a reef. So they have quite developed vision, similar to our vision. But most of the fish, if not all, including the sharks, because sharks are fish, they have limited vision. Although they can see good at night, but they really use little of their vision. So that sense is not as well developed as other senses. So what most of the senses that they have highly developed to find their prey or find their way around in the ocean are the Ampullae of Lorenzini, the lateral line. Lateral line is the set of pores that travel along the whole body from the head all the way down to the tail, to the top of the tail. Those pores sense vibrations in the ocean, in the water. So with those vibrations, they can sense if there's like an animal hurt in the surface or dying. That's when they sense and they go for it. They aim for something that's from a long distance. They can sense those vibrations travel a long distance. And then they aim for the animals using also their olfaction. So their smell sense is highly developed. Some shark species can sense a drop of blood from kilometers away, especially tiger sharks. And the hearing sense is also highly developed, very important. And lastly, the eyesight, the vision in sharks is the least developed, but they use it at the end when they're approaching a prey that they already have locked in from kilometers away, using the lateral line and the olfaction. So they basically aim and close into a prey using other senses, other cues, vibrations, sounds, and smell before using eyesight. Because as you know, visibility in the ocean is quite variable, and in many places is very low. It's just a couple meters visibility. And at night, there's no vision. So they use all these other senses. And so these animals don't sleep, except some sharks. They do sleep, they go to the bottom. But many of the sharks, such as the hammerheads, they never stop. They're always swimming.
Why sharks are important?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why sharks are important? So sharks are important for a number of things in terms of ecology. Some of them, not all of them, some of them are top predators. And being a top predator in the ocean, it's a very important position for the food chain. And we know now that when you remove the top predators, everything changes down in the food chain and creates what's called a trophic cascade. So when you have alterations to the numbers or presence of top predators, or no presence at all, it creates an alteration of the food chain. And in a way, those alterations or adaptations of the food chain they adapt to a more degraded food chain. So instead of having 4 levels, now you have 2 or 3 levels because you remove the top predators. So that has a negative effect on the food chain and the ecology of many different environments and habitats in the ocean. So they're very important to keep. And that was found out in terrestrial ecology when there were many studies before that, way before we studied the sharks in terms of that in the ocean. And some of these predators were studied like back in the 70s or even before, about their presence and abundance, like the wolves and the lions, all these top predators. When they're removed, it causes alterations and they degrade. You get a degraded ecosystem when that happens. And when, for example, in the ocean, if you remove some of these top predators, then you have the number of animals are in the next level down, which are the secondary predators. They're called mesopredators or mid-sized predators. They become too abundant. And when a certain level in the food chain becomes too abundant, that causes trouble to the next level because they overeat the next level down. So the next level down will basically disappear because there are just too many on top of them eating them. So there's some examples in the ocean, like the mesopredators, middle-sized sharks, mid-sized sharks, or fish eating all the herbivore fish. So when all the herbivores are eaten, then there's no fish to keep the algae in check on the reefs, and then the algae overgrows the reefs and overgrows the corals. So that degrades the coral reef. So that's an interesting study that was done a few years ago, how coral reefs can be degraded if you remove the top predators. So that's an example of the ecological importance of top predators. Older sharks are, as I said, they're not top predators, and many of them are medium-sized predators. So they also have a role. And so you want also the numbers to be balanced, and you don't want neither too many of them or too little of them. At the same time, if you have too many top predators, it will just vanish the mesopredator or the mid-predator, and that will unbalance the rest of the food chain down.
Could you please tell more about Pelagios, Kakunjá?
What do we do?
What do you do? And the organization is already for 13 years. What was the kind of greatest achievements and what was maybe the low points?
Pelagios, Kakunjá, we founded Pelagios in 2010. And it was founded by Mauricio Hoyos and myself. When Mauricio Hoyos and I met in early 2000s, we did our masters together here in La Paz. We worked together immediately, because we wanted the same thing. We liked the same thing, which were sharks, And I was doing my study on the whale sharks here in the Bay of La Paz, and he immediately wanted to participate on that. He was helping me, and it was immediately a good team effort, And so a few years after that, when he started his PhD here in La Paz and I started my PhD in Davis, it occurred to me that when we finished, why don't we get together and work as a team? Because we were getting trained by the same professor, by Peter Klimley, with all these different methods and technology, using telemetry systems and tags and transmitters and all these gadgets to study the sharks. So this was kind of the early days of those studies here in La Paz and many other places in South America, especially in the Galapagos and Malpelo. And so it was a great opportunity for us because nobody had been studied. Well, it was himself, Peter Klimley, that had studied the sharks here in the Gulf of California, but after him, there was no other studies or very few studies after that focusing on the telemetry, on the movements, studying the movements of the sharks here in the region. So there was an open niche for us. So that's the reason we created Pelagios, to study live sharks, live animals here in the Gulf of California. We already had the expertise, and we said, why don't we get together and do something But back then we didn't know, we had no experience with the nonprofit sector, not at all, because we're students, and so we had to learn about it. So we got informed. Some people told us some information how to form an NGO, and so we decided to form Pelagios, and we also got a grant from WWF, and this was back in 2010 to get a grant to establish Pelagios as a nonprofit, because we had no funding, no, and so Pelagios was established in 2010, but actually we didn't start the work here in La Paz, and we didn't have an office with just some paper in 2010, but right after that, in 2011, 2012, we started the first projects with the first funding ever. So it took us like a year or two to kind of get going with some funding. And it's been a journey. It's been a journey since those early days, starting something as a big question mark, have no idea where we're going to go to or how. We were learning as we were building this organization, and because it was new for us, we're very new on these things, so that we made mistakes. Of course, you always made mistakes, but we luckily we learned by making mistakes, and so we were able to start getting, after some rocky beginnings, because we got a little grant at the beginning, but then nothing. So it was kind of rocky at the beginning, almost closing down this whole idea. A couple of years after our first, when we opened our operations here, and but luckily we got some good contacts and we got some funding, and from that little funding we kind of built up to develop what we have right now. So through the years we've been developing many different projects. Always our baby projects, our favorite projects for me is the Hammerhead project, because it's since the beginning was my favorite. It's obviously my favorite species, but also it's my mission to recover the hammerheads in the Gulf of California. And for Mauricio, his baby is the white shark. So together with those two iconic projects, we've been building this NGO through the years, and we continue working with the same species in very similar areas. And of course, we have included other species like the bull sharks, the makos, many other species that you can study here in the Gulf of California and beyond, and the Reviahead archipelago, the mantas. Right now we're doing a lot of studies on the mantas, the giant mantas, the mobulas, and including the pelagic fish, like the striped marlin, the dolphin fish, and we're hoping to move on into the yellowfin tuna soon. So we've been lucky to have the opportunity to get funding and to get support to study all of these species, doing what we love, getting in the water, tagging the animals, analyzing the data, using all this data to move forward with other conservation projects. One thing we're very proud of is that we used our data to design the largest MPA in North America, which is the Reviahead archipelago. We designed that MPA using the movements of sharks and mantas that we had studied there through the years. So all this information pointed out to a new design from the old reserve. The old reserve are these donuts around these islands, and we came with the idea of doing a big polygon around the whole archipelago, and that was our design, based on science, based on the telemetry of these animals. And so we're very proud that using that information, the Reviahead National Park was created right afterwards using our science. So we're very proud of that. So that's some of the highlights that we've had through the years. Also, we've been training many students through the years. I have about 30 students that have graduated just from me. Mauricio has other students. We've produced over 100 scientific papers. Of course, theses, outreach materials, outreach publications. We produce a film. So a good number of highlights. I mean, really, I think we've done good. I think we could have done better. It's always good to think of that. We could be a little better, but I think we've done some good things. So the lowlights is not to have enough funding, for example. No, it's always a struggle. It's a struggle one year after the other. So it's always very stressful because we don't know how much funding we're going to get. So every year we stress a lot about how much funding we're going to get and So it's kind of like an endless cycle. So those are the low points of this whole thing. And because it gets pretty stressful to find the funding, we don't get any money from the government. We need to provide. All of the funding comes from private foundations and private people, private donors that they believe in our work. And some of them have been supporting our work for a good number of years. And luckily, we've been having kind of a transition from one big donor to the next. And so that transition between donors is also quite stressful. So those are the low points that it becomes a stressful, sometimes overwhelming, because we have to have different caps here. Sometimes I wear the cap of grant writer, talking to the students, writing papers, getting grants, talking to the cleaning lady, talking to mechanics, fixing the boats, solving problems, or solving a taxation problem because you have to pay taxes. Incredibly enough, even as a nonprofit, we pay full taxes here in Mexico. It's crazy, but that's how it is. It's insane. We pay all kinds of taxes like anybody else. So there's no cuts. There's no free lunch for nonprofits in Mexico. So it doesn't really help in that sense. And so we have to worry about taxes. And now the Mexican IRS is every year, especially this administration, is getting with more rules, tighter rules, everything more difficult. So we stress about that as well. And also, as I said at the beginning, the funding is critical. So we have staff that we need to maintain with salary, including our own salary as directors. We have to find it ourselves. Nobody provides us any money from any kind of entities. We have to find our own funding sources, and we have to maintain that at a certain level also, because we cannot go to the level that we had at the beginning. At the beginning, we were able to survive with very little money, just for rent and little things. But no, now we have our expenditures are pretty high, right? Not extremely high, but they through the years they become higher because we have staff, we have services to pay, we have many things to pay, many commitments. And so when you put all the different things that you have to for running an NGO, a nonprofit, it's overwhelming. So it's just too many things going on at the same time. So that makes it a bit difficult.
If you could come back for 13 years back in time and tell a younger version of yourself some advice, what to do differently, what would it be?
If I was sitting in front of myself, a younger version of myself, I would say, don't go to the nonprofit sector. No, I'm joking. No, I would say, make sure you get prepared well and read more about how an NGO, a nonprofit works. Especially here in Mexico, there are certain rules. And at the beginning, because we didn't know much, there were many things that we didn't know. And probably what we lacked was getting better informed about how everything works. And through the years, we've been learning, because we've participated in a number of workshops to try to understand how this whole thing works. It's my advice to him, to myself, is to get prepared and better informed since the very beginning, and don't wait for any workshops or anybody to tell you how to do things. You need to do it yourself. You need to get prepared for what is coming along. And in that, it helps a lot because it provides you the tools to confront surprises that come along the way. Because we're at the beginning 2 years after we started, we almost closed down Pelagios because we didn't have any funding.
What do you think are the biggest challenges in general to design marine protected areas and to run the organization like yours?
There are a number of things, but one of them is to have all the information in a single place, because you need a number of different pieces that have to get in place, like obviously the scientific information, that's one part, but also how you connect, how this proposal or design is connected or not, or how it resonates with other stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And so it's a big challenge. We've done it, because you need to open up your proposal to the general public, mm-hmm. to other NGOs, for example, to fishermen, government officials. It is a challenge because always there's going to be criticism. Always there's going to be, this has already been done and doesn't work, or this is a crazy idea, or whatever. And always, I've seen that there's always like a negative. It's not like it's a negative thing, but there's always like something that makes people hesitant of supporting your proposal. Mm-hmm. Like somebody comes to me with a proposal of an MPA, I will have doubts, because mm-hmm. there are so many different pieces that have to come together in order to have a solid proposal. That is a big challenge. And not only to have a solid proposal, but then when you have the proposal into the public scrutiny, and when you expose your proposal to the different stakeholders, mm-hmm. that's when it comes a big test, of your proposal, and that's when you get good, negative, positive opinions about how it's going to do or not. And in general, it's most of the workshops that we've done, it's kind of mixed, and it's kind of half and half. Some people are completely not against, but they're not really supporting your idea. And others, they're supporting your idea and say, oh yeah, this is a great idea, but who's going to carry the burden of all the work next? Mm-hmm. You're by yourself, and with very few exceptions, different groups, collaborative groups work together for the same purpose, such as this, because it takes a lot of effort and time. It's time consuming and it needs funding. So if you ask anybody, are you willing to embark into this designing an MPA, creating an MPA, most people will say no. I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the food, because it takes a lot.
How long does it usually take?
There's not a set time. There's not a set time. For example, some NGOs, local NGOs that I know have proposed, here in Mexico you have to create a document. It's a technical document that it's a justification document that you submit to the government, to the Mexican Commission of National Protected Areas. And they require that document, and there's like a pile of those proposals stacked in Mexico City or somewhere that have not come to fruition. They have not been declared, nothing, because they were just archived forever, because there was no interest, no political will. So even if you have even when you go. So the first step is to have a very nice, well-done project proposal and justification technical document. Then you socialize that. If you go through those filters, through the other stakeholder scrutiny, and if it goes beyond that, the next challenge is to have the political will. Even if everybody agrees that it's a great project, it's beautiful, blah, 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 the fishermen like it, the tourism sector likes it, the government likes it, the local government, the scientific sector likes it, everybody likes it, the NGOs, conservation sector. But then if the president says no, or there's no the current administration, they don't like the idea. There is no way you're going to create an MPA.
The
So,
administration is changing probably.
or the administration is changing and now they just don't need it right now. It's a lot of work. They don't care. So all this beautiful project is going to get deposited in an office in Mexico City and nobody's going to look at it again. So it's basically abandoned. So it could be never. So if answering your question, how long does it take? It takes from never to, if you're lucky, like the example that I know that was declared very quickly was the Revillagigedo National Park, and that was created in approximately a couple of years.
Wow.
That was a fast-tracked proposal and everything. And everything was fast-tracked, but the main ingredient, there were two main ingredients for that park to be created, was that there was a science supporting, that we had it. We had a design based on science. We designed the extent, the polygon of the MPA. And the other very important is that there was the political will. So the president really wanted to create that. But the political will didn't came just by default. It just didn't just happen. It was the work of other people, group of people in Mexico City, a group of lawyers that they were talking to the president and to different government levels to convince them that it was a great idea and it was necessary. So a lot of pieces came together to have that political will in place. A lot of pieces came together to have all the science, and with that we had a very strong proposal of a creation of MPA that became a reality. So that took little over maybe 2.5 years at the most. So that's like the extreme. That's really fast. And the other extreme is never.
Yeah.
And in between could be 5, 10 years, 20 years, who knows?
Wow. And you were mentioning that usually, like if the hotspot of a like endangered species could be in one place, but then next year it could be somewhere else. So you can't, the shape of the polygon changes year after year because climate changes and things like that.
Yeah, when we talk about climate change, yes, that affects our current knowledge and our current perception how to design MPAs, because most of the MPAs, if not all, are static. So the static MPAs have that problem. If the hotspot or where the animals are abundant, because of climate change, they start moving northwards or southwards, your MPA is useless. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but we're getting there. And so that's the reason there's been a lot of talk and conversations and also papers published about the dynamic MPAs. And dynamic MPAs are, some of them have been proposed for offshore areas, the high seas that do not belong to any country. And so there could be there are a number of places where dynamic MPAs should be placed.
What advice would you give young people who would love to help ocean and like conserve it better?
Well, one advice is to always look for the right information. There's just too many information in social media in general. Right now, one of the challenges, and that's what I tell my kids all the time, because one of them has a cell phone. Not all day, but he has his own cell phone. And you need to learn how to filter. But in order how to filter information, you need to have some, how to say that, you need to have a base, that you can support your decision of, oh, this is bad information, this is disinformation. So you have to learn how to discard disinformation from really good information, how to read or not worthwhile papers and publications everywhere. So it's a big challenge, but I recommend. It's kind of ironic, having cell phones, all this ways of communication, and now it's becoming a problem because we're overloaded. So what I see in the younger generations, like millennials, even younger than them, is that they're overloaded with information and they want everything very quick, because you click a button, you click a couple of clicks and you see something, you get something. And really, the world doesn't work that way. So everything is a process. So I think my advice for the younger generations is to learn how to filter information. Don't listen to every single thing they see on social media. And also understand that they have to be well prepared. They have to learn how to run their mind or education through a process. And because I belong to I'm not that old, but I belong to an older generation. And for me was, you get an education, you get a base of information, and from there you build up and you scrutinize and you select what you want to do or not, or what you want to read or not. But what I see lacking on the new generations is that they don't have that, because they're bombarded every single second by information. That's just too much. So they think, some of them is not, they do it on purpose, but they want everything very quick. So they're not going through the processes that the older generations did, to get an education, to read, to get a good background of information so you can base your decisions. You're better informed to base your decisions. And that goes all the way to conservation decisions, that you decide to help the dolphins, or you decide to help the sharks or the manatees that are in the process of extinction, or you want to save the turtles or whatever. You have to be well informed. Otherwise, if you base all your decisions on the social media, you're lacking a lot of good information to help different things, different causes, different projects. So I think it is their responsibility of new generations to get well informed. So that's one of my best advices.
Thanks so much, James. And thanks a lot.
You're welcome.